Nick and I are going to share the talk. We're going to present it in two parts, and we're going to introduce some tools that operate at regional scale, looking at predicting flow paths where surface water would move and accumulate. And they're driven by elevation models, so they're quite simple models, but they're good for synoptic scale views of watersheds. So on the screen here, I'll explain. There's some there'll be some pictures. There's sort of lots of colours. You can see on that picture there, I've done some sun shading. So even though the areas may be quite flat, that looks like there's dark and bright sides of hills, the topography's been exaggerated the way we've displayed it. You'll see some black features, little black dots, which are farm dams, and then you'll see some of the wetlands, the larger black areas. And then you'll see some blue flow paths, so they're predictions of where surface water would move if it was moving across the surface of the landscape. And then you'll see some blue blobby areas there, which are depressions in the landscape. So they're areas that water will tend to pond, and the algorithms that we apply to them will fill the pond up until it flows. So it gives a maximal extent of where those areas could be. Not to say that they'll meet those maximal areas, but it's where they would pond to before they start connecting with other flow areas. So the area of interest, I guess some of it was introduced. So the Southern Ocean encroached over the land in the Eocene 40 to 50 million years ago, as it's going to be described by Phil Commander later in the session. The valleys are infilled with sediments, creating the flat terrain, and then new valleys were carved into this terrain after the sea retreated and there was uplift of the land. And then sand sheets were moved over parts of the area, contributing to its flatness. The areas have been roughly identified just in this graphic, the North Stirlings and Bremer Bay and Southern Stirlings area. This is a satellite image of the area. Whoops, and I've gone too far. Look at that. You can see the Stirling Ranges in the middle there. It's a red image because that's a satellite image, infrared, so crops look like they're red in this display. Native vegetation, the dull green colour, and sort of bare areas where you can see some fire scars of those light blues. So what I did is I took the elevation data that was available from Landcare. So this is part of the state's topographic mapping. And we formed these digital elevation models, and I put some sun shading. So it looks like there's massive relief there, even though some of these areas are fairly flat. And then I applied an algorithm that looked for all the depressions. So these are all areas in the landscape that don't drain externally. Where the water falls, they sit and pond. And you can see from some of them have some different colours. First you'll notice the extent of them. They're sort of quite common across the whole area. And then you'll see there's some different colorations in them. So from the algorithm you actually also get an estimate of the depth of the depressions, which then allows you to calculate maximal surface area plus volumes. So the high concentration of the depressions indicate poor external drainage to rivers. So the water will tend to fall there and infiltrate down or evaporate. And of course salts over time have accumulated in these areas through that process. From the wetlands, we also took the Digital Earth Australia surface water mapping that they do from Landsat imagery, and they've done that over a period of about going back about 3 decades. And here we've coloured up the colours of the surface water and the frequency of the detection of surface water from satellite. So the red colours, there's a scale up in the top left there. So if the surface water is red, that means it's got water in it, surface water in it most of the time, 100% of the time of when the satellite overpassed, down to blue, which is roughly 2% of the time. So there's a sort of graduation there, and you can see a lot of the wetlands there have had surface water in them roughly half the time, according to this analysis from Digital Earth Australia. And you'll notice that some are probably connected to the groundwater because they've got surface water most of the time. Similar analysis for South Stirlings and Bremer Bay many peaks. Now, the limitation of this analysis from space is that if the wetlands are covered by reeds and trees, they've tended not to be picked up that well. So you'll notice some depressions in there that look like they don't have surface water, which they may well do. But this algorithm here only really captures surface water. Again, different rates of surface water frequency present, indicating that some dry out more than others. Then for each wetland, in this, what we've done here is I've generated from each of the major wetlands their catchment areas, also mapped the depressions and the major flow paths for those watersheds. So each of the large coloured areas are the watershed attached to one of those red blobs you see in there, which are the mapped wetlands. And then those blue depression areas aren't what are mapped in the topographic database as wetlands. So they're just areas of a big depression that have no external drainage. And you can see the new drainage systems that have been carved through that landscape, and the concentrations of depressions on some of the sort of flatter, higher country. Similar analysis in Bremer Bay. So in this analysis here, the flow paths, we treat the wetlands as where the water ends up, under the assumption it either sinks in or evaporates. If we relax that assumption a little bit, because we may want to know for the smaller depressions which ones will fill up and then flow on further down the watershed, we can choose to force everything to sort of flow to the ocean. A little bit unrealistic, but sort of interesting. So here down in Bremer Bay, has this thing got a pointer? Oh yeah. You can see the flow paths coming from this part of the watershed. They've gone into this depression. Now maybe that wouldn't normally flow on, but under the assumption that it fills and flows, and you can see it's carved a path down to the next one, and then down to the next one, and ends up going out to the ocean. Now, some of the larger depressions, the volumes on them are huge, right? They're obviously not going to fill up, and the satellite record shows they haven't filled up in the last 30 years. But for some of the smaller depressions, where the volumes are less and the catchment areas are quite big, then they may well fill up and then start flowing to the next depression and linking up as chains of ponding water. And there may be some useful information in there for your region to know. Some may have the potential to move some surface water, for instance, to one of the local tributaries, if that was something that people are going to do in terms of surface water management. Similarly for South Stirlings, and you can see these depression areas are larger than just the individual wetlands. So you can quite often see in these analyses, particularly in this area here, there's a number of different small depressions there that area would really have to take a lot of water before it actually started being connected externally. But the flip side of that is anything that falls within that area is going to tend to stay in that area and just sink down or evaporate. And similar for the North Stirlings. So in the North Stirlings, on the next slide, there's the catchments. This shows the watersheds attached to the different lakes, with the catchments here flowing to the east, and the ones on this side flowing out to the west. And as I mentioned, this is just another graphic of a zoomed up area showing how these small areas that may sort of accumulate surface water, you'll get some predictions under heavy rainfall, when and or not when, but where they would actually likely link up to should surface water start moving. So anyway, there's some tools that can be used for getting a synoptic understanding of how the systems may interact from a surface water movement perspective. There was some discussions yesterday around surface versus groundwater movement, so there's no answers here. This is predictions on where surface water would move if it was going to move, based on sort of topographic information. So in summary, the tools help define areas that are internally drained. You map the catchments that contribute water to wetlands and other depressions. From the calculations, you can estimate volumes of all the depressions. And from the satellite time series that are available, estimate the frequency of water and the permanence of water in each wetland. And now I'll hand over to Nick for him to introduce some tools that he's got that are online. Thanks.
All right, g'day everyone. My name's Nicholas Wright. I think I met most of you yesterday. Today I'm going to be talking about a surface water model viewer that we've put together a few versions of over the last couple of years, and we've finally got something that we can actually make public. So you'll all be getting a bit of a sneak peek of it today. If you want to follow along and actually view the web map, I recommend that you can scan this QR code and you can actually start playing around with it straight away as I'm talking you through it. This will also be available at the end if you want to grab it then. Just give one a moment. So hopefully that shoves you off into a AGOL online mapping thing. And it should look like this when you first get into it. Just hit the little button here, the I agree, and go OK. And you'll be dumped into something that looks like this if you zoom out. So what this map is showing is over this full southwest ag region, we've done flow modelling at a 10 metres resolution, same data that Peter was displaying. We've made it all publicly available with a whole bunch of interesting inundation tools and flow modelling and dams and water bodies and things. So if you zoom in to any particular area, it'll look something like this. So probably the first thing you'll notice is that we've identified all 200,000 dams in the southwest. That's what all these little blue blobs are. And all these little lines are all the flow paths. So red means a low amount of surface water accumulation and blue means a lot. And we're not telling you exactly how much is flowing through because we don't really know. It's all just kind of relative. We're just assuming the land is made of plastic and everything flows somewhere. So we're not taking into account different soil types or even like the steepness of the slope. It's just the direction of the flow. So it's pretty simplistic, and we're asking a lot of the data that we've got. So the hotter the colour, the redder the colour, the less flow, but also the less certainty we have behind it. But it's still the best thing we've got available, so we're making it available. So here's another example of what it can look like. So just kind of reading through this, The blue blobs are the dams. The lighter blue are the water bodies from space layer. So generally those are larger water bodies like lakes and wetlands and whatnot. So just kind of reading this, you've got, for this dam here, you've got a catchment that kind of goes up around through here. Something to keep in mind is that the terrain model that this is built from doesn't do particularly well in heavily vegetated areas. So you've got like flow that kind of goes through here, which may or may not be reality. But again, it's the best data that we've got available. So a few other things to keep an eye on is that because we're modelling this at a 10 metres resolution, fine details like contour banks just don't show up in that level of terrain model. So we've got flow going over the top of contour banks, which is obviously not, again, reality, but we're dealing with the data that we've got available. So in here, we've got a bunch of additional layers. So for instance, this is the old salinity layer from 20 years ago. Now that the new salinity modelling has been released last week, we'll update this accordingly in the next couple of weeks. We've also got a bunch of different layers, and if you can think of something which would be useful to have in here, please let me know and we'll try and add it in. So we've also got contours, and for most of you, this is probably the highest quality contour data that you've seen or have available to you. So this is 2 metre contours from that 10 metre DEM data over the whole southwest. So it can be pretty useful if you're using like older contours from old land monitor or from SRTM data. This is much nicer. And it's an interesting one because normally you'd have to get this data from Landgate, and Landgate would want to charge you for it. We've gotten the raster data for it, ripped the contours out of it, and made it available. So you can check it out. So what we've also got is inundation. So again, this is flow modelling, and then we've just filled everything up. Anywhere which fills significantly is highlighted here. So obviously, this is I think around Kojonup somewhere. We've got a couple of lakes that are filling up. So red is a lot of inundation, blue is a small amount of inundation. It's quite useful if you've got waterlogging in a paddock and you kind of want to know like what's the extent of it or what you can do about it. You can load up this inundation layer and it's like, oh, cool, yep, this kind of maps out to reality, and then you can go back to like the flow paths and you can say, right, the easiest way to move this water on is, oh, look, if we just kind of push this around, you can kind of move it. Surface water stuff is always way more tricky in reality than it is in when you're doing modelling, and there's a lot of things that seem like easy solutions that when you actually do it, it gets complicated. But yeah, the inundation stuff can be quite useful to figure out why areas are wet and staying wet. There's also slope modelling. So white is low amount of slope, black is a high amount of slope. And there are some limitations. I was talking about this before. Where you've got red lines, you've got low amounts of flow, but also lower confidence. When you see areas like this, where you've got a lot of parallel flow lines, it's probably low quality data that's driving that. That's probably not realistic. But again, it's the best data we've got available. Also, you'll see some weirdness in that there will be some dams that aren't coloured blue, and some blue areas that don't appear like dams. That's because the imagery that we use to extract the dams isn't the same imagery as the base map here. So in some cases, dams used to exist, so we've extracted the dam and now the dam's been filled in. So it'll appear that there's a dam there, but it won't be in the imagery. And you can have the opposite as well, where you've had a new dam being constructed that's happened after we collected the dam's data. Also, yeah, data resolution. So it's driven by a 10 metre dam, 10 metre terrain model, but there are features in reality which are finer resolution than that, like contour banks, that we're just kind of ignoring. So you can check this out with if you missed it before, there's a map. The map is available here. Soon, in the next couple of weeks, there will be a full web page. This is embedded within, which includes a full explanation of everything in it. That top QR code is our data modelling and analysis blog, where we talk about processing tools that we're using. Big thanks to Landgate for a lot of the DEM data and Geoscience Australia for the water bodies stuff. That's my email up at the top there, as well as a link to the blog. Now, also, if you can think of a good name for this web map, I would love to know it because we haven't been able to come up with anything good. So come find me later on if you've got a good suggestion. And I guess we've got a few minutes left, so if you've got questions now, shoot.
And Peter, would you like to come up and join us? So we'll open the floor to questions for both Peter and Nick. And Karina has a microphone, so hands up. Yeah, go for it. Make yourselves comfortable. I've got a question for you, Nick.
Yeah.
Frankly, how do you see this data being used or the tool being used and at what scale?
Oh, right. Yeah, sure. So I've had a version of this map in the works for the last 2 years. And I'm actually from a farm in Kojonup, and my dad uses it pretty regularly. So when you're planning for new dams and you zoom into your paddock and you've got one dam that's, a couple of years old and small, you can just zoom into it. You can see where all the flow lines are converging. You need to take into account your local knowledge, obviously, like if you're aware of groundwater, you might want to avoid it if it's salty, or you need to take into account soil type. But all of a sudden, the whole flow path part of it is solved automatically for you. You just need to take into account a whole bunch of other variables. But one part of it, which has been difficult in the past, especially a paddock that is close to flat, is figuring out where the water is actually moving. Or if you've got an underperforming dam and you want to know why, you can have a look at it. You can zoom in and say, hey, if I just put a contour bank in here that goes out 20 metres that way, I'm going to double the amount of water flowing in here. And also with the inundation stuff, if you've got a paddock that's inundated and you want to know why, you just zoom in, turn on the inundation, turn on the flow paths, you can see the catchment for that inundation area and you might be able to do something about it.
Great, thank you. At the back there.
Hi Nick, great presentation, thank you. I was wondering your very last comment you just made, you might be able to do something about it. So what are the next steps given you've got all that information? How do you know what to do about it? Where do you look?
Yeah, it's really difficult, and surface water stuff is, water stuff is way more deceptive than it first appears. You can go into an area and kind of think of a solution kind of straight away, and it almost never works. There's a lot of variables in. Saying that, when you zoom around and you look at dams, they're almost always in really good positions. So people are generally making really good decisions already. So I think this just helps a little. And again, I don't think you can entirely trust it, but it's a lot better than nothing. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Murray Field. There doesn't seem to have any indication from your mapping of the entry points into the deeper aquifer. I don't know whether you want to make some kind of comment associated with that, because at the end of the day, it's the deeper aquifer issues that we're dealing with, and particularly across the South Coast regions. My thing comes from forming the Esperance Landcare group back in the 90s and being frustrated during the entire time in that we really didn't have any kind of handle on the deeper aquifer waters and the movement where it goes and how it goes and the recharge from off that surface water.
Well, I guess that analysis is more surface analysis, but I guess the depressions is areas where the water that falls there or moves there from the watershed, it's either going to evaporate or it's going to sink there. So that's sort of entry points into groundwater. In terms of the deeper aquifer, that's really, I guess, a geology question, and maybe some of the speakers later today would have better answers to that.
Jordan Jernicke. Look, that looks great, and it's the sort of thing that I would be looking at using in terms of sort of catchment management issues. I've just recently sort of done by hand, not using algorithms, the catchment on the Warperup Creek, which is a tributary to the Pallina, and looking at what we would call in the old Australia stream order system, first, second, third order streams, and measuring the lengths of each of those sorts of streams as they end up for the whole of the catchment. Is there a way of measuring stream lengths and the different levels or orders of streams as you've got them in there?
Yes. So flow path length is something that's fairly readily calculable automatically.
We just want to be able to record it.
Yeah, looks fantastic, fabulous work. I was just wondering whether there's any mechanism that you've thought about to overcome that obstacle around vegetated wetlands and remote sensing, whether it's soil moisture or vegetation health index, or how to better identify those sites and their
Whether
extent.
they're inundated or not?
Yeah, and their extent and their likely.
Yeah, so
Maximum.
some of the more modern satellites have good thermal channels. So one of the things I quickly did, I didn't include it in the talk, but I downloaded some Landsat thermal in December and February. Some of those wetlands are obviously still evaporating. So that's one way to determine whether they're evaporating through thermal. The other sensor radar-based sensors, probably L-band. Now L-band, it's a 20 centimetre type wavelength. It's responsive, it attenuates with water and soil moisture, but it hasn't traditionally been free to ground yet. So it tends to be a bit expensive, but some of the missions next year and in coming years are promising free to ground L-band data. So it's a different sensor technology, and I think that will help alleviate some of those detection issues of inundated vegetation.
Yeah, thanks for the two talks. Nick, I suppose lots of extra, sort of options, things like catchment area for automatically calculating catchment area to the dam volume, erosion risk from some of the contour. Do you see any of those sorts of add-ons happening?
Yeah, so a lot of those dam metrics, for sure, that's pretty straightforward, like catchment area and size. I think we can even add in historical water levels as well, like monthly water levels for the last 20 or 30 years or something, assuming that the dam existed then. There's a bunch of additional things. This is kind of like the first pass at it, for sure. Yeah. Oh, also, the dam's dataset is publicly available on data.gov. You can search it up, and it's statewide if you want to play around with it.
Yeah, just curious if you thought about, would there be predictive features to this? So predicting under different rainfall scenarios where you might get flooding?
Teamwork, well done.
Yeah, well, I guess on all the depressions, as I mentioned, then we do have volumes on it. Then, in theory, for all those volumes, you do have catchment areas that you can calculate. And then you'd have to take some guesses or educated guesses as to infiltration rates and other parameters. So with a bit of work, you could obviously build on the very simple assumptions that we've shown here. So you could do something, but I'm not. I guess it's not happening next week. If that's an answer, I guess.